Last week in Genesis 34, we looked at two significant ideas. The first was that of seeking God's guidance in choosing the place of one's residence. Rather than being in Shechem, Jacob should have taken his family to Bethel, where he will ultimately take them, but it was too late for what was going on now. The second thing that we highlighted last week was that of parental responsibility for one's children. Now this evening we are going to examine the third idea found in this chapter. And remember, we will be in chapter 34 yet again. It's going to take us a total of 3 Wednesday nights to get through this. This is the second. So here is the third idea. It is the danger of living in and blending with the wicked world. Now, I do not mean that we live in a world where a teenager can't be raped, though that is bad enough. More than that, you and I live in a world that so easily comes to terms with its sin and fails to see the wickedness in it. And this is precisely what is so prominent in Genesis 34. The fact that Shechem forced Dinah into a compromising situation and then violated her is hardly a unique event in world history. In fact, as such things go, this was a better situation than most even today. When David's son Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar, we are told that afterwards he hated her as much as he had loved her before. And then in 2 Samuel 13, verse 15, that is where that is found. And Amnon's brother Absalom took his life, took Amnon's life, killed him, slayed him. Genesis 34:3 tells us that at least Shechem loved Dinah, and he spoke tenderly to her. Literally, he spoke to the heart of the girl. At least in this instance, the perpetrator possessed a deep attraction to Dinah. So the mere fact of seduction does not show the world of the Shechemites that they in fact were so wicked, but their utter neglect of the fact that Shechem or anybody else had done anything wrong. They saw nothing out of order with what had taken place. When Hamor came to Jacob to propose the marriage, there was not one hint of apology. There was not the slightest confession of wrongdoing by his son. None of the Shechemites said, this should not have been done. Look at verses 8 through 10. Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage and intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us. Take our daughters for yourselves, so you will live with us, and the land will be open to you. Live and trade in it and acquire property in it. Check out verse 7. The sons of Jacob came in from the fields when they heard about it. The men were grieved. They were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. Note Hamor's casual acceptance of evil compared to the attitude of Jacob's sons. Now, lest you think this is not an issue today in our modern world, and even with people who attend the church. A couple of years ago, we were visiting the home of our daughter who lives in Middle Georgia. And we were on the way out the door, and something was said about homosexuality. And our granddaughter said, well, what's wrong with that? Well, of course, my granddaughter and I had a discussion later on in the evening about that. However, this is what is happening even in churches today. This is often what is being preached from pulpits of churches. What's wrong with that? Well, nothing, they say. And the casual acceptance of these things becomes rather stunning. You know that this month is Pride Month. And I've sort of said, I think we ought to put on our church sign, we take pride in Jesus Christ and Christ alone. The last time I did something like that, we were bad-mouthed the world over, and I mean the world over. We lived through it, though. I said, well, we could be more subtle and just say, we glory in Christ and Christ alone. But it's doubtful that anybody would even know what that meant. If we put the word pride in there, then everything would just be wonderful. But the Rays, a professional baseball team who have become a political mouthpiece of the left, wanted their players to wear the pride colors, the gay pride colors, which many of them did. But some of them, especially among the pitching staff, said they weren't going to do it. Which, I'm grateful for the pitchers who took this stand, as much as I have bad-mouthed some of them for their lack of pitching acumen. I'm grateful for that particular stand. However, an article that I was reading the other day said this: the fact that some Rays pitchers have not wanted to don the gay pride colors reveals a deeper issue within the Rays organization. I wanted to spit and cuss right there. Do you ever want to just spit and cuss? I want to spit and cuss right there. I did not outwardly, though I was spitting and cussing inside. A deeper issue. What? Well, that is the world we live in. Do you understand that? And it's not just this issue, it's all kinds of issues. I mean, we could talk about the abortion issue. As so many people in America demand the right to take the life of a child in the womb. And some of them even want to have that right up to 3 months after birth. Have we lost our minds? I've been spitting a lot over that one. Not cussing, though, not me. But this casual acceptance, and people who don't accept it, they are the weird ones. Have you been caught by the fact that Haymore and his family are not the down and outers here when we look at this story as a whole? These people are not low-life people from whom you might expect nothing less. These are upper-class people. They have a sophistication. They seem to be educated and civilized. It was precisely these good people who had no sense of their own immorality. Now, we as Christians are often quick to see the sin of the openly wicked, and we say, we don't want to hang around that crowd, but oftentimes we can be slow to see the evil of good people. And that kind of evil is actually worse. Why? Because it often goes unrecognized and it goes even denied. It is not a good idea, or is it not a good idea, to be on the alert for our children and ourselves to the so-called good people and good society? I would suggest to you that there's no place out there in the world that is safe. Remember, it was not the prostitutes and the drunks who crucified Jesus. Who was it? The good, righteous people. We live in a wicked world, but wickedness is not something on which the world of unbelievers has a monopoly. Often there is evil also among the believing community, as we discover in chapter 34, as many of us were so shocked last week that this is even in the Bible. And some who may not have been here last week were reading this chapter and you're shaking your head going, what? Who demonstrates the greater evil in Genesis 34? Is it the Shechemites or the children of the patriarch Jacob? Is it not Jacob's sons? Yes. It's true that the people of the land were wicked, above all in the utter insensitivity to the wrong done. But apart from that, they behave in an honorable way, as anyone could behave under the circumstances. Shechem truly loved Dinah, and he wanted, by means of honorable marriage, to repair the affront to her. Hamor, too, his daddy, though indulgent of his son's reckless actions, honestly held out a hand of friendship to Jacob. He proposed intermarriage between the two peoples. Now, we're going to get into all this next week and see how that comes to the surface there. He suggested freedom of business trade. He assured these foreigners that there would be no discrimination against them wherever in the land they might choose to live. And before they had finished, Shechem offered a proper dowry for Dinah. A dowry that had no limits. It could be as great as Jacob and his sons wanted it to be. Now, over against this generosity and openness on the part of the Shechemites is the scheming of Jacob's sons. Their pride had been offended. We understand that. Dinah was their sister. The offense was felt as being against them personally. There was no respect for them personally. So their wrath had been aroused. They were determined they were going to wreak vengeance, not merely upon Shechem and his father, but upon the entire city. What's more, they used their religious beliefs as a cover for their action. Check out verses 14, 15, 16, and 17. They, Jacob's son, said to them, we cannot do this thing. That is, give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us, in that every male of you will be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you do not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter. You are noting here that these sons refer to Dinah as their daughter, as well as Jacob's daughter. Simeon and Levi intended neither to settle down among the Shechemites nor have the family intermarry with them. What they are doing in this negotiation is lying their fool heads off. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I don't think God would have taken pleasure in Jacob's family coming together in any kind of contract. We get to that next week. But then these two men, Simeon and Levi, were not interested in God's pleasure. They were only interested in wholesale murder. Then later in verse 31, they tried to defend their actions by saying this: should he treat our sister, next slide, like a prostitute? So these men avenged a terrible sin by an even more terrible sin. Someone has said what we see here is the result of religious fanaticism, but I wish to say that there is not 1 ounce of religion in what they did, only sheer cruelty and vindictiveness exercised under the guise of a religious rite. The men who could plot and wreak such vengeance, did not possess one grain of religion, even of a fanatical kind. The only thing we see here is savagery at its worst. If their motives had been true, they would have covered their sister's shame by allowing the marriage and bringing Shechem into their family and teaching him the ways of Jehovah God. Instead, they robbed Dinah of that refuge, and they forced her to live all her life under a cloud of disgrace. And all of this in the family of the chosen patriarch Jacob. Could anything be sadder and more disappointing in the entire Bible, especially in the Old Testament? Donald Ray Barnhouse said that the sign of the covenant of God was appropriated by Shechem to gratify his lust, by Hamor to increase his cattle, and by the sons of Jacob as a cover for murder. They used the pledge of God's favor, circumcision, to cloak their intentions, which, by the way, is exactly what the Jewish leaders did to Christ in the first century. Check out verses 25 to 29. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, came upon the city undetected, and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Jacob's sons came upon those killed and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, their donkeys, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even everything that was in their houses. Now, we hear about such activity as that today, and at least the world screams about it for a while. Finally, in verse 10, Jacob spoke to his sons, but you've got to wonder why he did not speak to them earlier. But even more amazing is the precise response when Jacob at last spoke to his sons. Look at it. He says, "You have brought trouble on me by making me repulsive among the inhabitants of the land, and since my men are few in number, they will band together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." Jacob did not utter one word of blame for the sin these sons committed, but blame only for the danger that could now come upon them. We are not surprised that Jacob seems to have forgotten the promise of God's protection that came to him in verse 14 of Genesis 28. Do you remember it? Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and in your descendants all the families of the earth will be blessed. Wow, what happened to that? Was Jacob being guided now by the promises of God? Were his sons being guided now by the promises of God? Not one member of Jacob's family mentioned in Genesis 34 appears now in a favorable light. It is a shameful incident. But in spite of its sin and its many repercussions, listen to this, God had still not given up on Jacob. And he would yet teach Jacob and continue to develop his character. So where have you been? How long have you been there? Do you know someone who is there now? There's great news. There's hope for you. There's hope for me. There's hope for us. There's hope for anybody we know who has been taken in by this kind of life philosophy. If God could and would still use them, He can. And He will still use us. But the refiner's fire is coming, as we shall see later. In Genesis 34, Jacob could not find the courage to reprove his two sons. Only a mild rebuke dominated by self-pity. But when Jacob lay on his deathbed many years later, things were going to be different. When he was on his deathbed, he saw the events of that tragic day in chapter 34 at Shechem from a more godly perspective. So let's sort of take a sneak peek at those verses found in Genesis 49. Go ahead and turn there if you'd like, beginning with verse 5. Daddy Jacob says Simeon and Levi are brothers. He couples them together because of the scheming they did at Shechem. Their swords are implements of violence. May my soul not enter into their counsel. May my glory not be united with their assembly. For in their anger they killed men. And in their self-will they lamed oxen. Now notice verse 7. Jacob says, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob, that's another name for all of Israel, and disperse them among Israel. Now, while it was a bit late to acknowledge the hatred and the evil, at least Jacob, in the end, named the actions of Simeon and Levi for what it was: senseless brutality, ruthless violence, and unbridled self-indulgence. Now, it's interesting to note that Jacob's curse to scatter Simeon and Levi's descendants literally came true. The descendants of Levi never owned land, but they were scattered throughout Israel as ministers on God's behalf to the people. But they owned not one square inch of land like the rest of the tribes. As for the descendants of Simeon, they were eventually absorbed into the tribe of Judah. And there was no longer the tribe of Simeon. Now remember the primary ideas in Genesis 34. First, the significance of the place we choose to live. Now we have to say that with kind of a grain of salt, because where in America can you go that the world with its secular philosophies have not already been there first? Where would you go? Where? Don and I mean, we've talked about, hey, let's go to, where's it? Panama. For $1,200 a month, we could live there in the mountains, have servants, and I'm going, I've always wanted some of those.
Oh, excuse me, you got me.
I might have stepped into it deeper than I wanted to go here. So where do you go? What do you do? Where in America would you move that's safe for your children unless you go somewhere in the top of a mountain and then you'd probably be eaten by bears and wolves up there. The second thing we have said is the parental responsibility to children. And then the third is the danger of blending with the world. So let's allow Dinah to blow her horn for a moment. Blending with the world is normally unintentional. There are not many believers who just set out, who get up and just set out and say, I'm going to become absorbed into the world. They just don't intentionally do that. And yet it happens. To be absorbed into the world actually means you do nothing. You don't resist it. You're just neutral. But when you are neutral, which way do you go? When you take the boat engine out of gear, where does it go? Are these hard? With the prevailing currents, with the prevailing winds. The boat is no longer resistant to the prevailing currents and winds so that it can go wherever the driver wants it to go. It just drifts. And that's exactly what happens. You know, I was talking with somebody the other day about university education. And I said, you know, it's sort of amazing to me that every university just about in America has begun with a slant toward conservative ideology in education. But over time, they just drift. And I was saying to this person, it almost makes one very hesitant to develop any kind of ministry and organization, because as sure as you die and your vision goes with you, this organization, this ministry is going to go to the left. It happens all the time. Even within Christian organizations, if you keep up with it, we just get there. And people say, what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that. So it's not an intentional thing. It just happens. Dinah did not start out with the idea of starting a family revolution or crisis. She may well have been innocent in all of this, but she strolled through a forbidden zone, knowing neither that it was forbidden nor that it was dangerous. Did you know from a distance, everything looks terrific? Did you know that? Everything does. It always does. Now, I remember when I was a kid. Now, this is kind of a man conversation, and so you ladies might not want to listen to this. I don't know. I was probably 10, 11 years old. My dad took my brothers and I to Georgia Tech to see them play football. And so Tech's right there in Atlanta, and Dad went to Tech, and so we were kind of Tech fans, and so we got there early, and we were watching Georgia Tech's $1 million band, when $1 million meant something, march toward the stadium. And so as they came, the majorettes were out front. Now, ladies, you're not going to like this. And they were a distance away. I mean, and here I'm a kid. I'm 10 or 11. My attention is immediately drawn to the majorettes. And I sort of poked my dad in the side. I said, do you see who's out front? He said, yes, son, but wait till you see him up close. Well, of course I did, and he was right. You just didn't go to Georgia Tech to find women back in the 1960s. You know what I'm talking about, David Fitz, and you probably don't go there today. Everything looks good from far off. But when you get there, You see all the foibles. You see all the flaws. You see all of the defects. You see all of the difficulties. We don't believe that because we look at it from far off. And we are as fooled as our kids are. Well, maybe this won't be too bad. Here's the second verse to Dinah's tune. The crossover usually takes place over time and is subtle. A person may not even be aware that it's happening, but watch this. The world will be as patient as it will be vigilant in its reach. They'll wait on you. And they say, we'll get them. Just hold up. They're coming. Here's the third verse to Dinah's tune. The results can be as devastating as it is. That's not supposed to be lasting. That's supposed to be lasting. That sounds more Georgian, I know, but it's supposed to be lasting. Can be as devastating as it is long lasting. This is something that Jacob had not learned from his uncle Lot. He knew the stories. He heard them all. But he did not believe that it could ever happen to him. He did not believe that it could ever happen to his family. Therefore, he himself was not diligent. Proverbs 23:32 says, it bites like a snake in the end and stings like a viper. Here's the fourth verse to Dinah's tune. And this may be the worst of all because it's right here among us. The world turns religion into form without personal impact and spiritual power. Now, I'm certainly not saying that every church in America today has turned religion into a form without power and personal impact. But I would suggest to you that it is becoming more prevalent. And that is certainly the world's view of religion. They don't care if you got religion. They encourage religion of whatever stripe it is, as long as it makes no personal impact upon you and has no power. Be as religious as you want. And many of those whom we might say today are Shechemites, or maybe worse, Jacobites. How would you say that, Steve? Jacobites? Jacobites? Termites? What would you say? No power and no impact. It just means nothing. Our churches are filled today with men and women just like that. And as we discovered in our study on Philippians in chapter 3, people inside the church can be just as bad or worse than people outside the church, but at least we know what is wrong, and at least some of us put up a struggle against it. At least that. But out there's no struggle. Out there, it's all casual. Out there, it is meaningless so that individual men and women become Lord of their own lives. I really have not wanted to be negative today. I never mean to be negative, but if this is not a picture of the world in which we live, what is? If this is not applicable to the world in which we live, then what other part of the Scripture would be more so? And so this event that happened probably 1500 BC, it has just come forward right up to today. And here we are. So what do we do about this? Well, you know the old standbys. We pray. We're going to be praying. We're going to be praying in just a little bit. I'd rather be praying when Jesus comes than not praying, hadn't you? I'd rather be found before Him seeking His face than not be found before Him seeking His face. So we're going to pray. We can do that. That's just a tried and true thing. And listen, it's making a tremendous difference in the life of this church. So I want you to stay. I mean, if you care what the pastor thinks, although I don't check off any boxes, who's there and who's not there, I'd love to see you there. I mean, gosh, it's just 20 minutes. And you can come to my house and watch Barney and Andy if you'd like. You can't get them, I got them. We can do that. But you know what? We can teach the truth to our children and our grandchildren. And we can stand firm even if the world hates us. Because the ultimate result, we don't even want to think about.